folks, it's Hans from GNAT-TV. It's the spring of 2020, so we're in that really strange world we find ourselves in right now. But just a few weeks ago, in a totally different time and place, in an alternate reality it seems like, I had a chance to meet a wonderful man with a wicked sense of humor. He was a World War II vet and he had just turned 100 years old. Some of you may indeed know who I'm talking about. Anyways, he invited me out to his place. I caught him right in the middle of making pot roast for some guests that were coming out to dinner that day. But he was really kind, and he sat down and he told me about his early days, and he especially told me about that ugly war. And in these weeks since then, I've been putting together the footage, and I've been listening to him again and again say the words in my head. And he reminds me, in fact, I think he's going to remind all of us, that even though we face very difficult times right now, that there are those that have come before us and have faced incredibly difficult times as well. And they've emerged from the other side and they're still able to smile and find the hope and the kindness and the beauty of this world. So, ladies and gentlemen,
I am Henry Deshawn's Chandler, but that was my christened name, and that's still my legal name. But everybody calls me Harry since my mother changed her mind when I was about 3 months old. I was born in Brooklyn, New York. I was born at home. I went to Adelphi Academy, which was manager of the football team. The family had a car. I was the only driver in the family. I started out being a good student, but I got active in all kinds of stuff on the campus. But Dr. Erbrock was a strange, kind of a strange guy. They offered me a job in the Procter & Gamble Defense Corporation, which was in Prairie, Mississippi, where the Defense Department was building a plant to make bombs and fuses. During this period, Pearl Harbor happened. I went to the Columbus Air Base, which is nearby, and enlisted for pilot training. I couldn't see myself in the infantry. I couldn't see myself with a bayonet. Sent to what they call transition school, and was taught to fly the B-17, which was a 4-engine bomber. In 1944, I was 24.
24.
I was far and away the oldest guy on my crew. The navigator and the bombardier were both college graduates, but just out. And the rest of the crew were teenagers. So my job was mostly to fly the airplane and to provide leadership to the rest of the crew. And we were flown to Rattlesden in England, which is near Ipswich, east of London. We started to fly combat from there. I don't think I was scared because I didn't know what was coming. I had heard a few stories, and I knew that in the 8th Air Force, planes got shot down fairly often. But I also knew that the Luftwaffe had been pretty well decimated by this time, and that most of the casualties happened because of ground fire. On our 28th mission, it was my 28th mission, for the crew it was the 26th mission. We were bombing what we were told was a marshalling yard near Oranienburg, which is north of Berlin. And we dropped our bombs, and as we were headed back, we got in the sights of some unbriefed 105mm guns, which were on a moving freight car. And one of the shells hit our plane in a position that removed the whole front end of the airplane, including the controls in front of the pilot, so that I was knocked out, but when I came to, there was nothing in front of me but fresh air. And I poked my co-pilot, who had controls in front of him, but he didn't seem to be awake or alive. So I unfastened my seatbelt, thinking maybe I could crawl over and manipulate his controls. But instead, I found myself out of the airplane altogether and falling toward the ground. So I did have a parachute on. I pulled the ripcord. It opened. I floated down and landed in a plowed potato field with a couple of German police officers around me saying, "For du, das Krieg ist fertig." For you, the war is over. Now, that wasn't true, but to explain why. But anyway, they took me prisoner, and I lost my boots. When the chute opened, they just popped off, and they gave me two shoes. One was German, and the other was British, and they fit pretty well, and that's what I used for the next several months. That night they put me in jail, and my bombardier was also there, who was Jewish from the Boston area, and spoke some Yiddish, could be understood by the Germans a lot better than the rest of us. He became our negotiator, and that was important because we would get Red Cross parcels which had cigarettes in them, and the cigarettes were much in demand among the German guards, so we could trade with them, and we got some better food as a result.
Why didn't the guards just take the cigarettes out before they gave you the packages?
That's a good question. I don't really know, except that it would have been against international law. And I do know that we were officers, Americans, and flyers. And those were the top-ranking positions in the eyes of the Germans. So we probably got preferential treatment wherever we went. As prisoners, we did a lot better than a ground-gripping private. As prisoners, we were sent on like an overgrown streetcar into Berlin the next morning. We were put on a train that was headed for Frankfurt, all the way across Germany. And it took us a week to make the trip from Berlin to Frankfurt because the train stopped so often. So we got very little to eat on the train for that week. After the first day, I think we got nothing because the other passengers objected strenuously to send these American prisoners into the dining car So we were kept in our coaches from there on. When we were on trains, we would frequently be subject to bombing by American aircraft. And there was one situation I remember quite vividly where P-47s came over and they bombed the engine of the train that we were on, which of course stopped the train. And the guards opened the doors to the boxcar that I was in, and they told us to get out and to get down in a ditch that was about 100 yards away, which we did. And the Americans bombed each freight car back one at a time. When they got to one that was full of Yugoslavian prisoners who had not been released by the Germans, some of them were killed by the bombs, some of them escaped and were shot down by the SS that were around in not big numbers, but they were always in control. And they were mean people not to be messed with. From Frankfurt, we walked most of the way. Once in a while, we would put on a freight train. We walked to a place called Moosburg, which is near Nuremberg. And there was a huge prison camp that had prisoners from all the different countries that were involved against Germany in World War II. In Moosburg, I probably spent 4 to 5 weeks there before we were liberated by General Patton's Third Army. We would get some black bread every few days, and we would get Red Cross parcels maybe once a week, and we would get some watery soup some from time to time. So we continued to lose weight, but we were not malnourished, I don't think, at that point. The liberation was interesting in that we never saw an American soldier. What we saw was the guards left the towers and just ran away. And we opened the gates and we walked out. And my little group of 5 or 6 guys walked up a country road nearby, and we spotted this fairly prosperous-looking farm. And so we decided to go up and see if we could get something good to eat. So we went up and we knocked on the door, and the farmer came to the door. And we said, "Essen," and pointed to our mouths. And he said, "Petrol." And we said, "Okay." And we went back to the road, and within a couple of minutes, a Jeep came by. We hailed him down, American Jeep, and we told him what we needed his gas can to carry it on the back, spare gas. And he said, "Okay." He said, "You guys have had a tough time." So we took the gas can up to the farmer, and he looked at it, and he was amazed. It's probably more petrol than he'd seen in 2 or 3 years. So he said, "Come on in." And we went in, and all of the ladies they sat us around a big table, and all the ladies were fairly old. I think the young ones were put up in the attic.
Right.
But anyway, they served us over the next hour or so a very handsome chicken dinner with dumplings and potatoes. And toward the end of the dinner, we felt some uneasiness behind us, and we looked around and there were 2 or 3 Russian prisoners walking up the driveway. And so we said, so we take care of this to the farmer, and we went out, all 6 of us, and we said to the Russians, "This is our territory, you go next door," in sign language and in English. And the farmer was happy with that, and they served us dessert. And then later we left, and we went back to the prison camp and spent the night in our old beds.
Because where else are you going to go?
And the next day, Americans did come in, and we were taken by bus to a nearby airport, and eventually were flown to a place called Camp Lucky Strike in northern France. Took a couple of weeks of processing there. We put on a boat and sent back to New York, and that's when I was able to notify my family that I was still alive.
Interesting, because they had no clue for how long.
3 months.
Yeah, wow. That silence was,
Yeah.
yeah.
So that's pretty much my military history.
Harry, was it strange when you came back? Were you different? Or were you just so happy to be back?
I think I was just glad to be back. I didn't know much about how I would feel at that point. I just felt happy to get back and be with my family. And what I did was we all came up to Vermont. We had cousins up here and spent the rest of June and July up here with our cousins. And then I went back. I was on leave then, and I had to go back and report for duty in New Jersey. And when I got back into the military, I was not normal. I guess I had traumatic stress disorder or whatever they call it.
Yeah.
But I was behaving strangely, and so in the meantime I'd gone to Cincinnati and talked to my old boss there. I told them that I decided not to return to P&G because I was going to stay in the New York area. And so they recommended, my boss recommended that I apply for a job at General Foods. And as soon as I got working in civilian life, I began to get back to normal again. There's one final thing that I'd like to tell you about that followed the military story.
Gotcha.
During the period from 1945 to 2005, I was in Berlin probably 3 or 4 times and tried to get into the Russian zone to where my plane was shot down, but didn't succeed. But in 2005, I decided to go back, and I wrote a letter to the local paper that I was coming and who I was, and didn't hear from them, but I did hear from the great-nephew of a friend of my traveling companion, Barbara Howland, who knew some young people in Germany who knew about my particular airplane and where it was shot down and what happened to all of the occupants. And so we went over. Barbara had a grandson who was rowing in Brandenburg in an international race. And first we went to meet my new friend, and he took us to a site near Oranienburg where they were extracting unexploded bombs from here in 2005 that were dropped in probably 44 and 45. Eventually, they took me to the place where my plane had been shot down. I actually met a gentleman by the name of Herr Dr. Fischer, who was a retired professor from Potsdam University, who said when he was 14 years old, he saw my plane get hit, and he saw it was in a spin and it was on fire. So that relieved my anguish that I didn't talk about it for 50 years because I was ashamed that I had escaped from the plane and 6 of my crew members had been killed. And they gave me documentary evidence that it was my plane, and actually the target had been more than a railroad yard. It had been the plant where the Germans were developing a part of their atomic bomb. And it had been bombed before we went, and it was bombed again after we went. But that was a key target for American bombing. So that's kind of the end of that story.
It's funny, Harry, you finally found peace, and I love the fact that you live on a road that's named Peace. I don't know if you chose that, but it's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, that's good. I hadn't thought of that.
Can we talk about being 100?
Well, it takes a toll on your body being 100.
I bet it
Your
does.
balance isn't what it used to be. I'm lucky in that my head still works pretty well, although my memory is, particularly for names, is not as good as it used to be. And I'm much slower than I used to be.
Are you surprised at the positives you see at being 100? Are you?
I'm very lucky because I've never seen anybody function as well as I do at 100.
Can I ask you a hard question?
Sure.
Do you reach a point where you go, I'm good. Anytime, God, you want to take me, it's quite all right. I've had a great life. Or when you reach this point, you go, you know what, I'll take every tomorrow I can get. Like, where do you fall on that?
Well, I've got a great family. I've got 10 grandchildren that are doing exciting things.
Yeah.
I like to keep up with what they're doing. I like to see them and talk to them about what they're doing, how they're living.
This is all a gift, in a way.
Yeah.
Because if you'd left 20 years ago, you wouldn't see any of this.
Right.
If you'd left when you're 80 or 81, 82.
Right. So that suggests that I want to stay on, despite the pains and anguish of aging. But I'm sure there's a point when I'll say, okay, it's time for me to go.